Welcome to the Amanda Quick Show. I am your host, Amanda Quick. I am the best-selling author of The Sex Trafficker's Wife, a story of truth, faith, and trust in self, a public speaker, and a trauma advocate. This is my show where no topic is off limits. From my own personal stories of trauma and adversity to the healing journey after trauma, parenting after trauma, and the spiritual awakening that often follows our traumatic stories. Quantum physics, spirituality, and the realm of possibility. If this sounds like your jam, subscribe for more, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Amanda Quick Show. I'm your host, Amanda Quick, and I am so excited to talk to you guys this week about an entirely new framework that came into my awareness over the last couple of weeks. You know, I've been talking a lot about the healing journey and some of the new spiritual components that have turned on for me as I've been on this path. And part of what I haven't talked about is really what that looks like, because this is the part where we get into a little bit more of the woo-woo, and has been something I haven't talked about as publicly. But for me, when information, new ideas, light bulb moments come in, it feels like it comes out of literally nowhere. I just am lying down or I'm thinking about something totally unrelated and it hits me. And lately I've been contemplating a lot about this experience and the purpose of it and why I'm able to manifest so fast and so strong in some ways, and other ways it doesn't work out so well, and vice versa for other people. And there's, lots of talk in the spiritual communities about law of attraction and being in your emotions and all of these various methodologies and healing modalities. And some of it really resonated for me and some of it really didn't. And it's really easy to get sucked into different teachers and their methods and their results and want those for yourself and try the methods and maybe even have some success, but not in the same manner or fashion. And, I'm certainly guilty of doing the same. And I think on some level, it's how we learn. But I've also disconnected a lot from that recently and really have been focused on being in my energy and what feels good to me and how do I want to bring forward things in the world. And, that really kicked off with launching my book and being on a bunch of different podcasts and being interviewed. And I was really been sitting with my manifestation style, my methods, what works for my energy and myself. And as I was thinking about that and thinking about, when I'm fighting for my kids, when I'm fighting for myself, when I'm trying to manifest a job, a house, things like that, real physical, tangible things, it works really fast. It works really easy. I get the ideas. I have momentum. It's just go. And I trust that it's going to be done. There's no question in my mind whether it's going to happen. Sometimes most of the time, it doesn't happen as fast as I would like, truthfully, but I'm about the most impatient person out there if you get to know me. But usually in the grand scheme of time, it's very, very quickly. It took 6 weeks from waking up to have full custody of my kids. It usually takes less than a couple of months to have a job better than the one I could have even asked for. Houses show up exactly when I need them with more things than I think I need. And it's always been like that. I've always managed to create those type of manifestations very, very easily. But anytime I'm trying to create a manifestation that's based on an emotion or based on a spiritual path, that seems to be a challenge for me. And I've been sitting with that and go, okay, my energy really wants to focus on these physical changes in my life and bigger in the world and humanity. And how do I merge what I'm doing in a sense and bridge that together? And, really focusing on the energy behind fighting for my kids, fighting for the world, fighting for change. That's where I have this gusto and this drive, and my passion is behind that. And so it's easy to get behind these projects. It's easy to keep going because there's so much work to be done. And there's so much problems and struggles in the world. And it can maybe even seem daunting. And what can I do about it? I can affect my life, but who else's life can I affect? And just really sitting in all of that and thinking about my children and the world that I want to see them grow up in. And the world that I want to exist in and really co-create. And as I was thinking about my kids, my children are very different humans. All three of them are polar opposites of each other, three of them. And when I say that to people, I mean very seriously. They are three polar opposites. They are nothing alike each other in any way. And I think that's somewhat common in siblings, but legitimately, they're super different. My oldest is very, very mental in his head. He's on the autism spectrum. He's brilliant. He taught himself to read at 2.5, 3 before he even went to preschool. He was actually memorizing words and knew how to read non-phonetic things before he learned to sound out phonetic words. And, was doing multiplication and division in kindergarten or something. Like, this kid is going to, from an intelligence standpoint, be able to conceptualize anything he wants. Right now, he's focused on coding and Minecraft, but he's 13. So, but from a social perspective, from a emotional perspective, he struggles. He has emotions, but he doesn't really know what to do with them. And socially, he's kind of confused about how to interact with other people because they're so different than him. And he's always been this way. And he hyper focuses on things. I think he must have been 3 or 4 when we first bought Legos for him. And it was probably the first time I realized he wouldn't eat if I didn't put the Legos away. Like, 6 hours went by without breakfast or lunch, and he did not want to stop because the hyper focus and the puzzle and the put the pieces together is how he operates. And if I compare him to my middle child, who I've talked some about, he's socially, emotionally very, very sensitive. He's full of big emotion, all of the emotion, good, bad, and everything in between. And even as a baby, he was hyper aware of other people. When you start watching like TV shows, when he was 1 or 2, if there would be somebody on TV that was scared, even the G-rated movies still have a moment where people are a little bit scared. He would scream and cry and freak out and have to leave the room. Like, he could not handle the intensity of the cartoon character's emotions. Like, that much emotional awareness in a small human isn't as common. And I didn't entirely understand it because I don't operate that way. But as he's gotten older, I've really seen it as, his strengths and the way he operates. And in a lot of ways, his empathy has made him a target for predators. But ultimately, it's also going to be something that he gets to use in his own way. And as he processes everything that's happened, is going to be able to grow in a way that he can really, really help other people with their emotional states. And, that's really exciting to think about for him. And then my little one, who is neither of those types, he's the fireball. He's the go, 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 go kid. He wakes up, pops up, and wants to be outside playing with friends, wants to do stuff, wants to be in activities. And he's so physical, just so physical. And, his biggest triggers are if he feels excluded from things. And if he doesn't feel physically included, that's the end of the world because everything is about movement and action and all of that. And so as I was thinking about my children and the ways that they operate and my own manifestations, I had this aha moment hit me. And these happen occasionally, and sometimes they're small light bulbs, but this one hit me in a just holy moly, how did I not see this before? Because in the spiritual communities, in the healing communities, in the yogic teachings, any spiritual practices, there's this concept called energy bodies. And it's named slightly different and it's put together slightly different depending on the modality. But ultimately, this concept is that we are more than our physical bodies. We are not just this meat, but that we also have an emotional body and a mental body and a spiritual body and an etheric or soul body. And the arrangement is slightly different and how everything connects and what's responsible for what, again, differs depending on the modality. But this concept of the 5 energy bodies is still prevalent throughout many, many teachings. And when I was learning healing modalities, we talked a lot about how our emotions and our mental state manifest in the physical, and how our physical can react to our emotions, and how everything is so interconnected. You can't just look at physical symptoms. You have to look at mental and emotional and what's coming down through spiritual channels as well, which always made sense to me, because clearly there's more than just the physical meat when we look at illness, and people absolutely manifest illness from trauma, and we see it all the time. But I hadn't quite looked at it with this perspective that hit me. And because when I was taught, and I think all the modalities are taught, the order and how it's connected slightly different, but the way I learned was that your energy bodies were like extensions of your aura. Like if you think of your physical human suit and the extensions just slightly outside of it, and your emotional body slightly outside of the physical, and the mental is slightly outside of that, and the spiritual is slightly outside of that, and so forth. And when I looked at it that way, it makes sense that they all connected. But my awareness, this download, as you might call it, was showing me is that that's not true for everybody. And that people have a primary that's actually their primary connection to their soul level body. In that it wasn't just through the spiritual channel that we're connected to the physical. And the image that showed in my head was almost like a pyramid that was connected to source, the universe, whatever you want to call it, and that people's primary connection to that differed based on the energy type that they were. And these energy types were directly correlated to the energy bodies. And when I thought about it, I was like, my kids are the manifestation of a physical person, a mental person, and an emotional person. It's like, oh, well, that's really, really nifty. And as I was thinking about that and thinking about my parenting journey and the times that they've really triggered me, or I've been really frustrated with one of them, it's always been fascinating to me that only one of them usually is frustrating me at any one moment. It's almost like they would trade who's currently pissing me off or who's currently having a meltdown, and the other two would wait their turn. And what I kind of realized as I was thinking about that is they're actually triggering me to look at that energy body in myself. If it's my little one, then there's something in me. I need to physically move. I need to do something. He's saying, Mom, hello, go, move, take action. And when my middle one is triggering me, there's an emotion I'm not looking at, or I'm not processing, or I'm not seeing, because he's all up in the emotions and he's feeling it and he's pulling on me because I need to pay attention to something. And my oldest, we butt heads because I'm also up in my head all the time. I don't have quite the same arrangement as he does, and a lot of it's because I've learned how to exist in the world differently. But if he's triggering me, there's usually a battle of wills and a battle of minds, and we actually can get into long, drawn-out arguments over who's right about something. And so, he's always pointing me back to, the beliefs I have and what's going on in my mental field. And so as I was kind of sitting with this, I was like, I wonder if other families are like that. And if other families are like that, what does that look like? And thinking about my husband, Justin, and his family, he has 3 siblings, and his sister is emotional. She's very much in her feelings. It's very much about connecting to her feelings. And that's, something she even teaches and talks about a lot. And one of his brothers is very, very physical. He has a physical job. It's all about doing and, doing the things that matter to him. And he works out a lot, and he hangs out with his friends, and they play video games. It's all physical things. And his other brother is very, very mental. And he's always been somewhat like me and a puzzle solver. And he's the fix-it person. And he's always figuring out how things are put together and what he can do to improve. And he likes, house projects in that sense, because it's another project and a puzzle to solve. And he's very, very mental. And Justin, my husband, I realized was an example of somebody who was actually connected spiritually first, because he's always been very, very different and quiet as a kid and didn't really feel like anybody else understood him. He never really saw the value in a lot of things that so much of the mental and physical people saw the value in. And he, while has a lot of emotion, it's different for him. It doesn't process the same way like his sister. And I was just sitting with this, I go, oh, they have one of each. Cool. And then, of course, they started trying to map out everybody else I could think of in my head, because why not? And friends of mine and my family members. And I was starting to see that ultimately there's a primary type. There's an energy type that's primary for all of us. And it boils down to the 4 energy types. And when I thought about myself, and as a mental person, everything I do ultimately is for my mind. All of the physical movements I do is to help my mind be either clear or to process something or to move something. When I work on my emotional state or I'm in my feels, I'm deconstructing it. I'm thinking about it. Why do I feel this way? What's the message? I'm always in my mind. And, people make fun of me because, especially in spiritual and healing communities, it's about feeling the feels and releasing the feels. And I think my feelings. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I'm starting to really see that this is just who I am. I think my feelings, and yes, my body feels them. And I've absolutely cried and been upset, but I'm always looking at them from a mental perspective. And from a spiritual perspective, even the spiritual download, such as this one, I'm taking it apart and putting it back together. I'm trying to understand how it fits with what I understand about manifestation and magnetism and the way that we create our reality and what that looks like. And, I keep taking it apart and putting it back together, always in my head. That's just who I am. And I relate that back again to how I manifest. And when I think back to the whole point of going down this path was how do I manifest? And I manifest in the physical. I am creating in this reality. I am creating experiences for myself and for my kids physically present here. And so I was seeing this deconstruction of the masculine and the feminine, because anybody who studied masculine and feminine energetics or even been somewhat aware of them, or even if you haven't, just follow me for a minute. The traditional men, the masculine, is thought of and perceived to be the doer. The mental and the physical would be in this masculine energy. That's action and do and structure. And the feminine is the opposite. The feminine sits in the emotional and the spiritual. And that's traditionally been the be, the intuition, the being the feels, right? You sit and you be, and it's not doing. And that masculine has been coupled with the doing being the mental and the physical, and the feminine has been coupled with the being of emotional and spiritual. And I was seeing the being and the doing and the mental and the physical and the emotional and the spiritual taken apart. It was like there was almost a distortion in how it was put together, because yes, there are masculine men who were very much in the physical, in the doing, in the thinking, and there are feminine women who are very much in their emotions and very much in their intuition. But that's one pairing. That's not the majority of people out there, realistically. I know a lot of them, yes, and it works for them, which is great. But I also recognize that I've never fit into that box. And in fact, I really never fit into any boxes. And so as I was seeing this deconstruction of the way we are arranged and the way that our primary energy type is actually connected and our focus for how we process information, that if I deconstructed what being and doing meant, and I saw myself as the mental person that I am, the other end of that mental line is the physical. That's my manifestation point. That's my magnetism. That's what makes me the most magnetic. If I am physically out to create an outcome in this world, I am the most magnetic ever. But if I sit in the feeling of what I want to create, or I sit and I meditate about it, all jack shit happens, truthfully. I've tried, believe me. And maybe I don't do it right. I don't know. But it doesn't work for me. I have to follow and trust what's in my mind, and I have to take action consistently. And when I do, it creates energy. It creates movement. It creates momentum. It doesn't even feel hard. And so what I was seeing is that for somebody like me, who is a female, being in my feminine, being in my beingness is actually my mental and physical connection. That I be that energy. I be mental and I be physical, because when I am and when I'm most turned on and in that, that's when things happen fast. That's when things move. And that the harder work for me, the things that have been more of a struggle, the things that are the doing, or in my case, if we look at this as the masculine, is actually the emotional work and the spiritual work. Those things didn't come innate to me. And of course, as a child, I had emotions and I had awarenesses, but they were not innate in the sense that they weren't as part of who I am. And so it was easier to shut them off and then to have to work to turn it back on. And that ultimately the goal is to actually reconnect all of our energy bodies back together so that everything can go its appropriate channel. And that all the work I've done over the last 3 years is basically putting myself back together and reconnecting my emotions and reconnecting to my spiritual channels so that I can be and do in my most magnetic form. And when I saw it like that, when I saw that we could basically map ourselves in the way that our energy bodies are connected, and that by mapping them, we could not only understand ourselves and why we operate how we operate, but we could also tap into our full manifestation, magnetization potential in a way that we might have not really looked at before. There's a lot of books, a lot of teachings about manifestation. There's a lot of, this is what worked for me and follow my process. And it works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And I feel like I've really kind of uncovered this gold mine of why. And it's really exciting because I've since then taken this concept and I've met with pretty much everybody who was willing on my Facebook feed. And I've sat down and I've mapped out all of the 4 energy types and what they look like and how they have manifested into these humans, into friends, into family members. And when people have been successful in manifesting what they desired and when they haven't. And what I'm seeing more and more is that once we understand kind of where we need to be connected, then there's sometimes some effort in reconnecting us correctly. Because I actually met with quite a few emotional-based people, quite a few people like my middle child and a good friend of mine. And a good portion of the emotional people out there they're so disconnected from their emotions because of what they were told as a child, for instance, or they were told, you can't have that big of an emotion, or that's not okay to act that way, or it's not okay to feel that much. And they shut themselves off because for an emotional person, the emotions are who they are. Just as my mind is who I am, their emotions are themselves. And when somebody tells them don't be you, and you're a kid and you don't know any better, you start to disassociate. And they have so disconnected themselves from that emotional body that most of them have a very hard time with the rest of their bodies. Most of the emotionals that I know who have been disconnected have had a whole lot of issues with the physical, with their physical body, with illness and disease and the ability to move and issues with food, all of it. Body issues, everything. It's all physical stuff that gets distorted because they haven't been connected to their emotional state. And some of them also have issues with their mental state, whether they feel like they've got ADHD and their mind can't shut up, whether they feel like they just can't get it together, they can't take action like they're supposed to. All of that story is disconnected emotional people who are not able to be in their emotional state. And I was just seeing how all of this was connecting. And was fascinating because what I was able to recognize is I can pinpoint what kind of person you are from a mapping standpoint. And then we can take a look at why you've had the struggles you've had and where we need to focus on connecting you back first. Because there's so much programming in the world about men versus women. There's so much programming in the world about how we have to show up, who we need to be, what that looks like as a male, as a female, as a wife, as a parent, as an employee, all of this programming of what correct humaning looks like. And if you don't fit into the mold of what a masculine man or a feminine female looks like, or even if you do, but you've been told you can't do it that way, or that way is too much, you can only be feminine if it's not loud. You can only be masculine if it doesn't step on somebody's toes. Or if you're a male who's actually an emotional or spiritual, then you're really not going to fit in because nothing's going to make sense. And you might hyper focus on doing without ever actually manifesting anything. Or if you're like me and you're a female who's basically lived her life in her head, until I reconnected to my mind in a way that I trusted myself and I really took what I knew to be true first, I couldn't affect any type of action. But I had to do that and then take the steps as they were presented themselves to me. And then once I was able to find that physical safety, I could do the work on the emotions and the spiritual. And truthfully, it was all happening kind of at the same time because I was following my mind as my guidance system. And so that's another whole piece of this, is that I was seeing that everybody has a different version of a guidance system. I know a lot of people who their body is their guidance system. They feel it in their body. They know it in their body literally moves them. Other people, their emotions are their guidance systems, and they may still feel the emotions in their body, but it's a feeling in a different way. And for me, my guidance system is my mind. I just know things. I don't know how I know them. I couldn't tell you how I know them, but they're there. My mind tells me, and today, at least, I trust that. And somebody like my husband, Justin, who's spiritual, his spiritual connection, his trust in the universe and his higher self is his guidance system. And he takes that information as the truth for him. And so all of us have a different kind of way that we operate. And all of us have to ultimately focus on trusting that guidance system, finding safety in that guidance system, because people out there who are disconnected ultimately have this level of distrust for that particular energy body, whether it's because they've not been physically safe, emotionally safe, mentally safe, spiritually safe, etc. And if they don't trust their guidance system, well, we're going to be disconnected, right? And this whole framework and this whole understanding of types of people, manifestation capabilities, how we need to be, what do we need to focus on doing? Where our information flows in? How do we make ourselves the most magnetic we can be so that we can manifest the things that we want? All just laid out right in front of me. And it was beautiful. And I'm having the most fun with it that I have had in a while. Because when I'm disconnected and I don't feel like I have inspiration or ideas, that's when I sit in my emotional state. And I've been doing that over the last couple weeks until this whole thing downloaded. And all of a sudden I have this burst of energy and all of this excitement to understand people in a new way. And the more people I've met with and the more people I'm helping deconstruct this, the more I can see the uses for this. And for me, in order for this to be successful, I have to have a physical, tangible outcome. And so I'm playing with what that is. And I'm playing with my mind of what I want that to be and how might this make sense, because for me, it all has to be a puzzle. And I'm wanting, first and foremost, to share this, to help people be inspired that you're not broken in the sense that you don't work like other people. When somebody says, this is how I did it, or this is how you're supposed to manifest. This is how you're supposed to heal from trauma. This is how you're supposed to feel or think, or this is how you're supposed to do physical activity or whatever it is. There's a reason that maybe it doesn't work for you, or maybe it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like your thing. And that doesn't make you wrong or them wrong, because we're all operating with our own body system. And I was even seeing that not every emotional is going to operate exactly the same way, because not every emotional person is going to have the same version of trauma in their lives, or the same version of how they've processed that disconnection. I have a good friend who's an emotional, who struggles with her body in a very deep way. She struggles with food. She struggles with weight. She struggles to take action on those things because in a lot of ways her emotional center is disconnected. But I have another friend who's emotional, who hyper focuses on working on her body, but has struggled greatly with her mental state and the mind spins and the trying to understand things when they don't make sense. Because again, she disassociated from her mind, but her body was survival. And so she took that as survival and discounted the rest of it, essentially, until she started to get reconnected. And then her body became a source of movement of that emotion and a power center, and helped clear her mind. And so it all works together. The mental and the physical really go hand in hand in working together, and how we either need to be or do, and as does the emotional and the spiritual, of how they either need to be or do. And as we understand those pieces, and we start to understand how the trauma or the experiences have impacted our connections, we can then kind of understand, how do we reconnect them? A lot of the emotionals out there, I'm finding, they don't feel safe in their emotions. They don't feel safe to feel the full spectrum of emotions. Sometimes some of the emotions are okay, but I actually know a lot of emotional people who don't feel safe to feel the full spectrum of joy. They're terrified to be disappointed again. They're terrified to be heartbroken, and so it's not safe to want what they want, to feel the joy and the excitement. And this belief, most of the time, started in childhood. It started most of the time in early childhood with either how they were parented or something that happened in their lives. And they decided that these things aren't safe, so we're not doing it. And they're a part of them disconnected. And they recreate these experiences over and over again to prove themselves right, ultimately, that it's not safe. And it manifests time and time again, as does everything, when we are disconnected. And so all of this traces back still to this concept of your beliefs create your reality. That still holds true here, because your belief about why your emotions aren't safe is going to keep you emotionally disconnected from your main center point. Or your beliefs about why your mind isn't good enough or smart enough is going to keep you from manifesting. Or your beliefs about why you're physically unsafe, unhealthy, unable are going to keep you from ever discovering an alternative. And so if you are following, and if you have felt like one of these maybe resonates more with you, and that maybe you can start to see why there's a disconnection in your field, I would love for you to consider why. When did you decide that disconnection needed to be there? And what happened? Who told you that this was the way it was supposed to be? Maybe it was even not an out loud thing, but who set that example? Who modeled that for you? Because a lot of people don't necessarily realize the models that we followed from our parents or our caregivers that raised us set our stage. You know, in my childhood, I was taught that emotions were not okay. My mom isn't emotional, big time. But she wasn't the one present most of the time. And her emotions were so big that even I didn't want to feel them. And when I was really little, I would throw up all over her to physically manifest her emotions for her. But then when my dad was primarily around, he was so emotionally disconnected that my emotions as a baby were unsafe for him. So I wasn't allowed to cry. It was easy for me to disassociate my emotions. But as a mental person, it didn't disconnect me from being able to manifest, because it wasn't my primary point. But now that I've reconnected, I also have the spiritual channel that I didn't have before in the same way also. But for somebody like my sister, who isn't emotional, being emotionally disconnected and unsafe kept her from even speaking until she was 3 years old because it wasn't safe. And so she's had different things to unravel in her life. And she was only 5 when my dad left. And so she had less association with him than I did. But we've all had whatever version of our experience teach us that certain parts of us were unsafe. I didn't have my spiritual connections connected and turned on in a big way until I was going through my divorce. It was all woo-woo crazy as a reaction to my very emotional mother, who was very connected to her spiritual because that's who she was. And I was not okay with being connected to her, so I pushed all of it away. And I focused on my mind because my mind was my safe place. My mind was who I was. Where I made sense to myself. It was praised for my intelligence. I got good grades. And it was easy to focus there. But even as a child and as a teenager, my physical has always been magnetic for me. As a teenager, that didn't look so amazing because I was physically magnetizing some pretty not awesome experiences with boys and sneaking out of my house and doing all the teenager rebellion things. I was physically calling that to myself. And then as I got older, I didn't understand how that was translating to unsafe situations. But now looking back, I can see it. I can see how in my mind I would have these ideas and they would physically translate to what they did. But now that I've reconnected all of me, I get more information that I can respond to. And I've done the spiritual work, and I will still continue to do the spiritual work and the emotional work. And it allows me to go forward in a different way. And so for those of you who are sitting here going, wow, that's super cool. I wonder what I am, or how do I deconstruct this and how do I learn more? Or I wonder how this trauma or this experience or this whatever is impacting me. I would love to invite you to first think about this one question, because of the people I've talked to, this is the one question that really answers, first of all, which type you are. And from there, we can kind of start to map the rest. So my little physical child, the biggest trigger is if you physically exclude him. If his brothers kick him out of their room when they're playing with something, if his friends don't want to hang out because they had some fight, that is the worst possible thing that could happen to him. He is hysterical. It's the end of the world. And this has been true since as long as I've known him. Being physically excluded from an activity, that's his trigger as a physical person. My emotional child, his biggest trigger is if he doesn't feel seen, heard, understood, like he matters. You know, if he's feeling emotional and he's pouting, he pouts really loud so everybody can hear him. And if I don't immediately go and, oh no, what's wrong? How can I help? You don't care about me. You don't love me. Huge, big emotional trigger. So the emotional trigger is not feeling that emotional connection from those around you, and it looking like nobody cares, nobody sees me, nobody loves me. The mental trigger for myself and for my oldest child is if somebody tells me I'm wrong. If somebody argues with me and says, you're wrong, you don't know something, especially if I know I do, especially if I've put it through my mental process or I have direct experience or I've learned about something, then I will fight tooth and nail. Nope, you're wrong. And my child and I, we have battle of wills with this sometimes. But if somebody tells a mental person who is confident in their mental that they're wrong, watch out. And for the spiritual one took me longer to find because up until yesterday, actually, I'd only met one spiritual person. And so I had a use case of one to confirm this with. But the spiritual trigger, the biggest trigger for a spiritual person is to feel like they're all alone in the world. That not only does nobody care, but there's nobody else like them. and they feel completely misunderstood and alien, essentially, in the world, because they're so spiritually connected from the beginning, when the majority of people are not, that nobody could possibly get it. And a lot of them are really drawn to spiritual work and sharing their art through the spiritual way, and they can't seem to understand why nobody else seems to care about the same things. Why doesn't anybody else care about connecting to their higher self and to connecting to all that is? It doesn't make sense to them, because that is who they are. And I know for my husband, he felt like he was completely alone in the world for most of his life. And that was a really big trigger for him. And so I would love for you to ask yourself, what's your biggest trigger? The thing that's been true since the beginning, the thing that resonates with you as, yeah, that one sets me off and still does. That's the one that's going to help understand that primary connection that needs to be connected first. And then the opposite end of that is your manifestation, magnetic point. And those two make up your beingness, who you are innately, the easiest things in the world for you without all of the trauma. Those would be the things that you could do no problem. With trauma, obviously, there might be some things to work on there, but ultimately that is your innateness. And then the other line, the other two, whichever those are your doing, the things that you've had to work on, the things that require effort, the things that you have to continue to practice, the things that are just part of doing the work and being human. And for those of us that have done that work, whatever that work is, we will find that when all of these points are connected, and we're connected to all of us in that way, that we will be able to magnetize in a way that we may have not fully understood before. We have to tap into our magnetic point as how we do it, but the rest of it all connected will help guide the way. And I'm really excited to see how this transforms, how this unfolds. And I did build a quiz, because everybody loves a good quiz. And I am going to post it out into the wild. You can find it on my website if you want, amandaquickhealing.com/energy-types. And that quiz, I will also put it in the show notes for those who are listening. We'll ask you the same trigger question and a few others to help discern which of these energy types is your primary and how that might translate. And my hope is this will give people a little bit more information to why certain modalities worked or didn't work, why certain methods of manifestation worked or didn't work, and really give us a focus point of where do we need to focus this next phase of learning, of healing on. Because really, that's the point. If all of us got reconnected to ourselves and all of us were fully connected to our personal genius, our unique, beautiful differences that makes us who we are, everybody would be guided by themselves in whatever way that works for them. And the programming and the installations and the societal expectations would just kind of fall away. It would be irrelevant. And we would get to create a world that was solely focused on being who we are and celebrating and empowering ourselves. And that's the world I want to be in. That's the world I want to create. That's the world I want my children to grow up in. And that's the world that I invite you all to come join and celebrate your uniqueness and your individuality and how you operate your gifts and your beauty throughout the world. That website link again is amandaquickhealing.com/energy-type. And it'll be in the show notes with all of the other information. And I am super duper excited. If you have some new awareness, some aha, some moment, please share. Please send me a message, write a comment. I would love to hear about it, because I've got something here, and I'm just really excited to see how this physically manifests and what the potential to do with this is. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please check back next week, Saturday, 8 a.m. Pacific, for next week's episode. Lots of love, everybody.